Hello everyone, Sam here, and we gotta talk about Solomon Kane, the Serpent Ring. This is a comic book miniseries. It was released last year, but it was collected early this year, I believe. Uh, I got this about a month ago, I believe, and I got it because I was really interested in Solomon Kane. For those who don't know, Solomon Kane was one of the creations of Robert E. Howard, who's generally more known for making Conan the Barbarian. But he did a lot of other characters too, and Solomon Kane was one of them. This particular comic was written and illustrated by Patrick Zurcher. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And Zurcher has done a whole lot of other comics. Here on the back, it mentions that he's worked on Superman, Iron Man, Moon Knight, Savage Avengers, which included the Robert E. Howard character Conan. So this was kind of an interesting thing. This came from Titan Books. For those that don't know, Titan is the comic company that got the license for Robert E. Howard characters after Marvel had lost it. They'd had it for a couple of years, but the Robert E. Howard estate, I don't know if it was a business disagreement or they just weren't interested in continuing with Marvel, but they gave the license to Howard characters to Titan Books, and they'd been releasing some Conan comics, as well as some Conan books. There's actually a Solomon Kane book out called Suffer the Witch, I believe it's titled. And this Solomon Kane book came around because Zurcher had actually been doing backup stories in the Conan books that were focused on Solomon Kane. And apparently both Zurcher and Titan Books decided they would give Kane an entire miniseries. And it was a 4-issue miniseries. This collection collects all of them. And it was showing this adventure Solomon Kane went on in Africa. For those of you that don't really know much about Solomon Kane, this is a very abridged version, but essentially he was a wandering Puritan in the 15th and 16th centuries who went around, basically the world, fighting evil. And his origins were always kind of vague. We knew he was from Devonshire, England, and we knew that he had some sort of military experience and that he was a Puritan, but there wasn't a whole lot revealed about him, and his motives for fighting evil were always kind of vague. His very first story, Red Shadows, dealt with this idea that he goes and wipes out this entire outlaw band, not because they did anything to him, but because he happened to find a woman they had attacked who died from their assault, and he just decided to get vengeance for that woman on this outlaw band. So he was a very sort of mysterious character, and a lot of Robert E. Howard fans actually like him more than Conan the Barbarian. And that's kind of a subset of a lot of Robert E. Howard fans, where a lot of us have Howard characters that we like more than Conan, simply because Conan's been done to death. And these other characters like Kane and Red Agnes and I'm trying to think who was the werewolf. There was a werewolf character, and his name's slipping my mind, but Sailor Mike Costigan. Just all of these characters Howard created that just haven't gotten much attention because Conan gets the spotlight. If you want to know more about Kane, I'm going to leave links in the description to the Rageaholics video about Solomon Kane. That's a pretty good introduction to the character. As well as Michael K. Vaughan. He had a couple of videos about Kane. I'll leave a description for some of them there. They'll give you a better idea of who Kane is as a character. So that's the basic setup for how this story came about. The actual plot of this miniseries is that Kane is on a privateering mission because he's working as a privateer for the English government against the Spanish. And he boards this one Spanish ship and fights everyone off, and he kills one guy who makes him does a deathbed confession and makes Kane promise to get something to a friend of his. And Kane is a very honorable man, so he decides, okay, I'm gonna get this thing to your friends. And because of that, he gets essentially roped into an expedition that travels from Europe to Africa. And the whole thing is that the secret information the guy he killed was carrying was information about the Serpent Ring. And the Serpent Ring is this artifact that gives great power to whoever wields it. And of course, the problem with Kane's expedition is that the party he is in is not filled with people who necessarily have the best intent. So there's a couple of scoundrels involved in this expedition. But there's also the fact that the ring itself is defended by a dark sorceress and a bunch of snake men. If you know anything about Howard's sword and sorcery tales, you know the snake men very well. So not only does Kane have to deal with his duplicitous party members, but also the evil sorceress and the snake guys. So he's very much up against the wall in this tale. So yeah, it's sort of an interesting setup there. So I'll first start off with what I liked about this comic series. The first is that I like that Kane kind of stumbles into the adventure. When it comes to Solomon Kane stories, Robert E. Howard had one of two methods of getting Kane into a story. Either A, he was searching for somebody that had wronged one of his friends, and he was looking all around for him, and he had a direct target. And the second one was ones where Kane kind of falls into the story going on. He just seems to accidentally come across whatever was happening. Red Shadows was kind of one of those. There was another one called Wings in the Night where he is trying to get away from some cannibals in Africa and happens to come across an evil group of pterodactyl men. So that was the two ways Howard got Kane into his stories. And in this one, it's the second method, because Kane kind of stumbles into this adventure because he's fulfilling the last wish of this man he killed during the privateer raid. And by fulfilling that wish, he keeps getting caught up in more and more sinister things. So I kind of like that idea of the Kane just sort of fumbles into this situation, and basically him trying to figure out a way to get out of it that doesn't end up with him dead or some of the better party members ending up dead. So that's a kind of a neat conceit. I also like that this story kind of, well, it doesn't kind of, it majorly highlights the religious tensions of the time. Because one thing that's very interesting is that the story actually highlights how Kane's Puritanism is sort of perceived. Because Puritans were, of course, a religious dissident group in England. They were not the majority, they were kind of the religious minority that was pushing against the Anglican Church. Essentially trying to purify the Anglican Church of Roman Catholic influence. And this story sort of plays on that idea of the tension between Puritans, other Protestants, Catholics, and even the Jews. This is kind of the first story in a while that I've seen a Solomon Kane story that actually emphasizes those religious tensions. And I remember that there was one story of Robert E. Howard's, I believe it was The Footfalls Within, that kind of played with that, with Kane being captured by like Muslim slavers in Africa. But all in all, Howard did not. He made a big deal about Kane's Puritanism, but he didn't really emphasize that element of religious tension so much in the stories. Mostly because Howard himself was not all that religious, based on everything I've read. So maybe he just didn't really have a conceit about what the religious tensions would actually be for a Puritan. But this story does mention it and a lot of the sort of religious tension going on at the time. So it was very interesting in that regard to see that examined. I also like this one character in here named Diamanta. And Diamanta is this Italian young woman who had a Christian mother and a Jewish father. And she was forced to choose one parent or the other, and she chose her Jewish father, and thus has been consigned to the Jewish ghetto of Venice. And she kind of has this interesting arc where she wants to, escape the Venice ghetto and, find adventure. But one of the things the story points out is that there's a price to adventure. You don't always escape adventure unharmed. And she kind of has an interesting arc in that respect of learning there's a price for going on adventures. And of course, because it's a Howard story and there's a female character, of course there has to be an attraction to Solomon Kane. Though fortunately it's generally one-sided. Kane is defending Diamanta throughout the story, but he doesn't have much of an interest in her. It's pretty one-sided. And it doesn't become obnoxious throughout the story. Like, it's not focused on hugely throughout the tale, so you don't get too much romantic melodrama. There was also a character who I thought was kind of fun in this, and his name was Nico Cassani. And Nico Cassani is this Italian mercenary who's part of the group, and his whole thing is that he's kind of the comedic relief of the story. He's essentially this knave who's always looking for women, including Diamanta, and his comedic shenanigans are not too distracting, and they work for what they're going for there. And he actually has kind of a decent arc where he's sort of having to decide whether to be the charming rogue who doesn't care about anything but money and women, and sort of having to decide, is he going to take that idea to its natural extreme, which may involve, maybe not doing the best things. So there's kind of an interesting arc there, and I think his arc throughout the story works pretty well. The other thing I liked is that the actual art for the story is pretty decent. Patrick Zurcher, from what I understand, he's more of an artist than a writer. At least he's more known as an artist than a writer. And yeah, his art in this story is pretty impressive. He does a lot of great backgrounds and historical buildings, like the actual drawings of like the historical buildings of ancient Venice and on the old ships. They actually look pretty good, and the characters are a little more of a mixed bag. There's some of them here on the back. It's hard to see with my camera, but the characters look pretty decent and pretty good facial expressions. So I think he does a better job with like the backgrounds and the environments, but the characters are drawn pretty well. So I didn't mind his artwork in this story. That was pretty fun. Another thing I like is that this is a story that actually ties more into another Robert E. Howard character than Conan. Like, one of my biggest criticisms about a lot of Robert E. Howard stories, or not his stories, but the continuation of his stories done by other authors, is that there's always an insertion of Conan. Like, Conan is always tied to whatever different characters are. Whenever these later writers try to do a Howard character that is not Conan, they seem to always find a way to tie it back into Conan and try to make sure Conan plays some role in the story, even if he's been dead for centuries. And to be fair, Robert E. Howard did do interconnections with his characters in different stories, because his occult detective, John Kirwan, had this connection to the Cthulhu mythos. And one of Conan's villains popped up in a John Kirwan story. So Robert E. Howard did do it. He did tie his characters together. But a lot of later writers really overdo it, and they really try to tie Conan into everything, even if it doesn't fit. But this story is slightly guilty of that. It does tie Conan to it at one point, but it emphasizes more of the character Cole. Cole was another Robert E. Howard character. He was kind of considered the predecessor to Conan, because he was in the age before Conan's age, the Hyborian age, I believe it's pronounced. And Cole was in the one before it. I believe it was called the Thurian age. And he was in exile from Atlantis, because Atlantis was still around. And Cole was actually where the Snake Men first appeared. He was in the Cole story, The Shadow Kingdom. This story ties more into that element of Howard's work with Cole and the Shadow Kingdom with the Snake Men. So I kind of like that it's sort of tied into a different Howard character other than Conan. At least a little bit. Like I said, there's still a little too much Conan in this story. But there's at least an attempt to tie it into Cole instead. So that was kind of an interesting take, and I'm glad to see it. So that is all the stuff that I liked about this story. But unfortunately, I now have to talk about what I didn't care for. And unfortunately, a lot of it is the writing. Because I said earlier, I know Patrick Zurcher more for his art than his writing. And unfortunately, I kind of feel like this kind of explains why, because I like the art in this, but a lot of the writing does not work for me. I just spent a few minutes railing about how a lot of writers put too much Conan into Howard characters who are not Conan. And this story kind of falls prey to that, because the basic setup for this story, where a bunch of disparate people like Kane and Diamante and Nico, all these different characters team up for an adventure, that's much more of a Conan type story than a Solomon Kane one, because like half of Conan stories are him teaming up with a bunch of other rogues and going on an adventure. Like, that's half of Conan's output, at least in regards to later comics and Conan stories that other people did. I'm not so much sure about how Howard wrote them. I've only read a few Conan stories, but later Conan stories really emphasize this ragtag group of rebels going on a adventure, and that's much more of a thing that fit with Conan. And it doesn't, and I'd argue it doesn't really work as well with Solomon Kane, because when you look at Howard's original Kane stories, as I was recently rereading all of them for an article I was writing, you really notice how Kane does not really have much in the way of side characters or companions. Like, there's a few stories where he sort of does, like the witch doctor Nalonga, but for the most part, he's generally by himself, and that was effective for those stories because the whole point of Kane was that he kind of had this mystique about him. Like, he was going on these adventures to help and rescue people, but you didn't really know why, like, other than this, like, general sense of righteousness. So that lonesomeness made sense as, like, keeping that aura of mystery around him. But when you shove him into a cast of characters, you kind of have to give him more interactions and more character moments. And I don't think that works as well for Kane as it does for Conan. And this is the other problem. The ragtag group of people he's with are not all that interesting. I was saying earlier that, Nico and Diamante are, sort of fun. They have sort of an interesting arc. But not so interesting that I was, like, really invested in their characterization. It's kind of like they're okay. They're okay. And everybody else in the group is not that interesting. To start with the main villain of the piece, Rolando Zarza. Rolando Zarza was this Crusader knight who was kind of thrown out because he was dishonored for doing some shady things. And he's a pretty stereotypical swashbuckler villain. It's like he has a million red flags saying he's not trustworthy, and Kane doesn't trust him, and Diamante doesn't trust him. But they still keep him coming on the adventure all the same. So, okay, he's not that interesting. And when this is a spoiler, but you can tell from the first second he's on a panel here, he's gonna betray the group to get that Serpent Ring, and it's so obvious. And it's not obvious in like a fun, like, aha, I know where this is going, and you're like, oh yeah, this has been done before, but it's fun. It's in a like just sort of this annoying thing where you're sort of like sighing and going, okay, when's he gonna betray him? Like we see it from 1,000 miles. When's he gonna do it? It kind of reminded me of that Conan movie, Conan the Destroyer, where I think it was Wilt Chamberlain was playing the one royal guard that was working for the evil queen in that, and Conan and the gang are so distraught when he betrays him. It's kind of like, well, we saw him planning to betray him, so it's not that big of a surprise to us. So that was who Rolando Zarza reminded me of, and that's not really a good thing. It doesn't help that Will Chamberlain was much more intimidating in that role. So yeah, Rolando's a bust. I didn't care much for him. And then we gotta talk about Abramo. Abramo is Diamanta's father. He's the Jewish scholar in Venice. And again, he's not terribly interesting either. He has the basic parental motive of, oh, I want to protect my daughter and make sure no harm comes to her, which, is fine, but that's pretty bare bones. And then the very last issue, they give him like this very weird, out of left field goal about how he wants to get the Serpent Ring because he wants to save the world's population of Jews. And there's only like one moment earlier in the book where it sort of implies he might have that motivation where he's like being harassed by the Catholic guards of Venice for not recognizing certain religious practices of the Catholics. But that's really the only moment that you get that sense that he's like, oh man, I'm tired of this oppression of Jews. And it just kind of comes out of nowhere in the final fourth issue, after 2 issues of it not really coming up much. You get this weird out of left field motivation where he's like, no, I want to get the Serpent Ring to save the Jews of the world. And it's like, okay, like it just feels like it comes out of nowhere, or it's just not, or maybe not necessarily nowhere. It's just not set up very well. So that was kind of a weird element. There's also this character named Mbandu. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Mbandu is this African convert to Christianity who helps the group navigate through Africa. And again, he kind of suffers from the fact that he doesn't get much characterization, because the whole thing they're going for is that he's a local African, but he's also a converted Christian, and he's kind of sort of torn between that idea of loyalty to the faith he was brought up in and the one he adopted in adulthood. That's what they're going for. But it just doesn't come through very well. It's just kind of like he has very little inner conflict over this. And most of this is more insinuation by Zurcher than something really conveyed well. And there's this one scene where his Christian mentor, who the priest who converted him, is revealed to be a snake man, and they kill the snake man, and Mbandu's reaction is just kind of like, huh, well, that's a bummer. And then they just move on. Like, there's no, like, him dwelling about the fact that, his mentor was killed and replaced by a snake man. He doesn't have, like, this burning vengeance against the snake men to avenge his mentor, he just kind of wipes the snake guy out and then just kind of continues with the adventure. Like, again, there's just, like, not much reaction, and it's kind of like... And that's a problem when the whole point of the character is sort of having this conflict between Christianity and his native African beliefs. But when there's not much of a reaction, it's just kind of like, well, what's the point? So I really did not care for Mabondu. He just didn't have anything to him. I mentioned earlier that Nico kind of has this interesting arc of going from a knave to a hero. And while I like that arc, I will admit that the actual pacing and steps to get there are a little muddled. Like, he goes from being a knave in the second issue to suddenly being, a little nicer in the third, and then a full-on hero in the fourth. And it's just kind of like... I think it's just the pacing of the comic just doesn't let it sit for a while. We don't really get this sense that Nico has changed. It's probably more of an issue with the comic's pacing than the actual writing. Because it's kind of cool seeing Nico go through that, but the steps to get there are kind of muddled. I mentioned Rolando's a dull villain, but the Snake Priestess, who is controlling the Snake Men in this story, she's not very interesting either. And this particularly stands out because Solomon Kane actually did have a very cool female villain from the original Robert E. Howard stories. Her name was Nakari, and she was the vampire queen of Nagari, and that was in the story The Moon of Skulls. And she had this very fascinating character element of she was a usurper of the Atlanteans who had controlled Nagari, and she was very bloodthirsty. But she also kind of had this fascination with Kane, because she thought Kane was not just handsome, but he was a killer. And yeah, it's true, in Solomon Kane's stories, he does kill a lot of folks. And she was very attracted to that. She wanted Kane to be her consort because she liked the idea of this man who is able to fight her soldiers and destroy others. So when you have that kind of character in Kane's mythos, and then you put up Shah Kabet, who's just kind of the general evil sorceress that, again, you see in a lot of Conan stories, she just doesn't measure up to Nakari. So, yeah, she's just she's not much of an interesting villain. But I've been talking a lot about all these other characters who don't work for me. And that might have been forgivable if it wasn't for the fact that Kane himself does not feel very, well, Kane. Because the whole point about Solomon Kane, the original stories, is that he was a very dour individual. It's like, he's wearing all black, he has this deep religious conviction, he doesn't really smile much. Like, he's very dour. That's the word that is repeatedly used throughout Howard's stories. He's a dour swordsman. But in this story, there's some weird moments where he's kind of, like, flippant and flighty, and, like, cracking jokes. Like, and you read those original Howard stories, if there are any jokes, it's not coming from Solomon Kane. Like, Solomon Kane is po-faced and treating everything of the utmost seriousness. In this story, we got weird moments where, like, they're sitting in a tavern, and a bunch of papists, Catholics, come up to him, or like saying, "Oh, you're a Puritan. You want to start trouble? You got a problem with the Pope?" And Kane does like this weird joke about how they wear stupid clothes and hats, and he's drawn of like this expression of like a. There's no nice way to say this. He's drawn this expression of like this snarky teenage girl who's like making a weird diss at their rival. Like it's just such an odd moment because I do not see Robert E. Howard's Kane like doing this weird Gilmore Girls verbal finger snap at his enemies. And then you got like this weird scene where Kane and Diamanta see an elephant, and the idea is that Diamanta has never left Venice, so she's never seen an elephant except in paintings. So it kind of makes sense for her to like stare and wonder, but Kane also does it, and I don't know, that just seems, Kane. Like, the closest instance to Kane staring in awe at something is when Muna Skulls, the entire kingdom of Nagari, just collapses due to what Kane perceives as, like, God's judgments. So seeing him, like, googly-eyed at this elephant, I don't know, that just didn't sit right with me. And there might be an explanation for that. Zurcher in the back says that, oh, this is meant to be like a younger Kane before he becomes the Kane we know. And I'm just kind of like, I don't buy that. I think Kane is pretty universal in his characterization. I don't really buy that a younger Kane would sort of be like this. So, yeah, there's just some elements here that do not work for Solomon Kane. As I mentioned earlier, while I praised Solomon Kane for emphasizing Cole's role in the story, they again have to drag Conan into it. And while I like the Cole connection, I kind of wish it hadn't been connected to Conan and Cole, and it just been like a new villain for Solomon Kane that would have been like fitting for him. Or like maybe bringing back one of his old villains who maybe have been either brought back to life or maybe somehow survived. I remember there was a comic where he and Conan teamed up, and the evil sorcerer from the Moon of Skulls had captured both Kane and Conan. But here they just sort of take the Snake Men, who didn't have much of a connection to Kane's original stories, and try to put him in there. And I don't know, it just didn't feel as interesting as trying to make someone who's much more of like a swashbuckler villain for Kane to face. There's also this one scene that really angered me because it felt very lazy. During this one fight, the Snake Men, Kane gets bitten by one of their snakes. And these are like magic snakes. They got special magical enhancements by Shakabet. And so you're thinking, oh, well, they got to find a cure for the venom before it kills Kane. Because it's a magic snake. Like, there's got to be, like, magic venom. But the venom only really slows him down for, like, a couple pages. And he completely gets over it by the finale. And it doesn't kill him. It only briefly weakens him, and then he gets up and walks it off. And I'm kind of like, Well, that's a lazy, that's a weak magical snake. If it can't bite someone and kill them with its venom, it's like there are regular snakes that can do that. So, yeah, Shakabet, you've got some lousy magic snakes. And the only reason that that happens is that Patrick Zurcher needed to have an excuse for why Kane separates from the group for a while. And so he's like, oh, well, he gets bitten by a snake. Oh, so they have to get some medicine for him, right? No, he just walks it off, lays down for a while. It's just lazy. It's a lazy writing technique. And it doesn't make sense for this, especially since Shah Kabed, you think, would have plenty of poisonous snakes at her beck and call. But for some reason, Kane only gets bit with the mildly debilitating snake. So, I don't know what's up with that. There's also the fact that I mentioned in the beginning, the setup for the story is that Kane kills a man whose name is Paulo when he's working as a privateer and he jumps on the Spanish ship. And the story sets it up that this is kind of a tense thing throughout the story because Paulo was actually Diamanta's uncle and Abramo's brother-in-law. So Kane is always kind of trying to tiptoe around the fact that, you know, he killed Paulo. And you think, oh, well, this is going to be an interesting tension throughout the story. But it really isn't because Diamanta she learns about it and she's, you know, sort of devastated for a while. But she gets over it kind of quickly. So it's just kind of that liar revealed trope stretched out. And again, it's only used to create a brief issue for Kane to overcome. And it's also used as the excuse for why Diamanta leaves him there to die from the snake bite. Again, it's just sort of clunky writing. And it's the writing that really hurts this book. Because the art, I think, is fine, but you get all these weird moments where Zurcher is trying to get the characters from point A to point B, but he needs to think of a complication. And he just kind of goes, okay, what's a complication? Oh, I'll set this up earlier in the story and it'll pay off later. It's like, well, that's a good idea in theory, but it has to have a consequence. And the consequence just doesn't really come through, or it's very minor. So, yeah, those writing, those attempts at like these little complications, they don't work in this story. I have a note written down here that's kind of a weird critique. I know it's a weird double standard in this story where the pagans have magic, and it works. The Jews have magic, and it works. But the Christian elements are kind of poo-pooed and treated as if it provides fortitude, but it doesn't really provide the user with like any magic or extended abilities, which was kind of a strange thing. I was kind of like, why are you giving all these religious folks superpowers, but not the Christians? Yeah, because as we all know, in the Christian theology, disciples of God never had like any interesting abilities like healing people or anything. Like, no, it was just all bland. And it's kind of like, yeah, is there, what's the implication here, Zurchler? Become a snake cultist because you'll have cool powers. And the whole thing with the Jewish magic, that kind of surprised me, because the whole idea is that Abramo is like part of this Jewish sect that was like, there was something about this Jewish sect that was able to unlock abilities or something, and he does it by like writing Jewish characters with his finger in the air. That was kind of a Semitic sorcery, I guess you could call it. But again, it's just one of those weird things where I probably wouldn't have cared, because there have been other... Because Howard did do stories where Kane did not have any... theoretically did not have any magic, but defeated magical forces. And you could argue that that's what it's going for here. But it was kind of weird seeing all these different religious groups having these abilities and the Christians don't. Because even when, like, this one Christian priest whips out a cross to get the Shakabet away from him, she just goes, lame. And then lights him on fire with her mind, and it's kind of like, what are you implying there, Zurchler? I'm sorry, Zurcher. Like, what's the implication there? So that was just kind of a strange element. I didn't really get that. And there was another thing. Speaking of Zurcher, he has this thing he does throughout all 4 issues of the book, where he does this weird storytelling device where he shows action going on in the story, and over the top of it there's narration. And the basic premise of it is that the dialogue is saying one thing, but the action is showing another. And that's okay the first time it's used, because it's meant to show Rolando's duplicity, showing, oh yeah, he's saying one thing, but his actions showing how he got disgraced from his Crusader sect. When it's showing that, that's okay. But Zurcher keeps using it throughout every single book throughout each issue, to the point it kind of becomes irritating. It just kind of like, okay, you have to let a scene happen. Like, there is just a lot of wordiness in this comic. Zurcher, which is weird, because you'd think Zurcher is an artist, he would want to, like, show things, let the scene breathe. But every one of these, there's always a whole lot of caption boxes, and it's kind of like, come on, Zurcher, like, let a scene sit for a while. And that constant thing of, showing the action while having a different narration over it, it's cute the first time, but the other times it just kind of becomes, okay, it's a narrative shortcut, which normally I'd be fine with, but not when it keeps happening. So that was kind of a clunky storytelling method. I mentioned earlier that Kane has like these weird comedy moments that do not work. But the other characters don't fare too well either. They have some really awkward comedy bits. Like, there's this one where Diamante and Solomon Kane are having this very solemn heart-to-heart on the ship going to Africa. And it's very interesting. You know, it's decent enough. It's Kane telling Diamante about the problems they're going to face on the voyage and telling her not to lose hope. But then it ends with a joke where, like, Kane says this one phrase, and Diamante thinks Solomon Kane is calling her fat. And she's not. She's as thin as a young woman can be, but she thinks he's calling her fat. And it's like, that's not a joke that, and it's very much framed in a way they're trying to imply, oh, it's a nice, it's a funny 16th century joke, and it's kind of like, no, you're saying it like it's a modern joke. And it's just such an awkward moment, and it completely kills the tone of that scene, because we see Solomon Kane having a solemn moment with Diamante, and then they ended with a fat joke. It's like, what was the point of that? Like you just kind of ruined one of the good moments that you had. Then you have what I call an MCU moment. If you've seen any of the bad Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, you'll know that everybody's always doing these razor sharp quips while gunfire and fighting is going on around them. And there's a moment in this where like Rolando Zarza starts like making fun of Nico during a firefight they have with some African natives, and it's just stupid. It does not work. It kills the tension in that scene. You know, every single criticism people have made of those moments in MCU films, you can apply it to this moment. And there's also this dumb scene where during that fight in the tavern with the Papists who come to harass Kane. Kane, like, tells this joke to Diamante during the brawl. It says, "Oh, don't step on my hat." It's like, what do you care about your hat? You're being attacked by a bunch of angry Portuguese Catholics. Like, why are you getting so uppity about your hat? It's like, again, it's just not a characterization I can see Kane like being snooty about his clothes. It's like, no, he went off on wild adventures. His clothes got torn all the time and he didn't care. So again, the humor is not just bad, it kind of ruins the characters. Especially Kane, because Kane is not a comedic character, even in like a dark comedy sense. So yeah, putting Marvel Cinematic Universe humor in a Robert E. Howard inspired story, it's not a good fit. So I really didn't like the humor. There's also this, speaking of lazy writing, there's this one moment that made me really upset. I believe it's towards the end of the second issue. And the whole point is that the Kane and the rest of the party have to journey all the way from Venice to down Africa. Not like northern Africa, but Sub-Saharan Africa. And Zurcher really does this lazy thing of saying, oh, he has Kane give this narration about on the boat we learned about each other quite a bit, and we know each other fairly well now. And it's kind of like, well, that's great, but we don't. Like, it's like the character interaction on the boat would probably seem like a good thing to show, because it could actually, show how Diamante learns about adventure, or how Nico learns to not be as much of a philanderer and womanizer. But we don't see much of that. And then I think Zurcher kind of knew he had to cover his bases a bit of that, so he goes, oh no, see, they learned about each other on the boat ride, so even though you didn't see it, they did. And it's kind of like, yeah, I that doesn't work for me, Zurcher. I need to know why these characters do have any sort of camaraderie, when the entire setup is they shouldn't, because a lot of them don't trust each other. So when you're trying to show how they gain that trust, you have to actually show them building that trust. So, yeah, again, it's just kind of a thing where Zurcher has to figure out how to get from point A to point B, but he doesn't quite know how to connect that believably. And so he sort of does this quick, easy method to say, oh, well, like on paper, this makes this character camaraderie come alive. And it's like, yeah, on paper, but in practice, it doesn't really work. So that was a pretty frustrating moment. Uh, this is a note I wrote down. This is a petty note. It doesn't matter to the story's grand overall quality. But there's this character who's introduced in the last issue named Hoto. And Hoto is introduced in this fourth issue. Like, he's given this name tag among all the characters in the group. Like, oh yeah, this guy's going to be important. And then he's immediately killed by a giant snake. And it's just kind of like, again, it's laziness. Like, you don't bother showing Hoto as a character. You just introduce him for him to get eaten by a snake. And again, it's just a highlighting of sort of the lazy writing in this story. I also think that the ending, I'm trying not to spoil it, but the ending is pretty cliched. If you've read Moon of Skulls, you know what's going to happen. If you've read that, that's pretty much the ending to this story. And it's the basic thing of like, oh, the villains die because they're fighting over power. Something you've seen in a lot of other stories. They're fighting over the Serpent Ring, and they end up dying because of it. Again, I'm spoiling that because you kind of know where it's going. And if you know and the problem is, again, I'm trying not to compare this too much to the Moon of Skulls, but the problem is the Moon of Skulls does a very similar concept way better, and was done by Robert E. Howard himself. So I'm just reading this whole book. I was just going, man, I'd rather just be reading Moon of Skulls. And Moon of Skulls ending is actually more impressive, even though it's only written out by Howard. But this has an illustration, and the destruction of the evil at the end is just kind of, oh yeah, that happened. And, you know, Zurcher is really trying to make it seem big and impressive, but it's kind of like you're trying to, like Robert E. Howard has you beat there, Zurcher. He made an entire civilization explode and fall into the earth. It's like, yeah, it's kind of hard to top that. There's also, again, this is also kind of a spoiler, but you kind of know this is going to happen. Solomon Kane leaves the survivors at the end of the story, because that's how most Kane stories ended. When he'd rescued the damsel or saved the young lovers, he would always walk off into the sunset. You know, like the classical Western hero. The Western hero from the cowboy movies. And this one, and I'm not gonna lie, again, I've had problems with Kane's characterization in this story. In this farewell, I have issues with as well, because one thing the story does is that it implies that, you know, Kane is loyal only to God and to Queen Bess, who is Queen Elizabeth I, who is ruling at the time of this story. And that's always been that's a common flaw a lot of new Howard writers fall into, where they think, oh, Kane is a classical hero, so he's loyal to his country. And that's not entirely true, because in Howard's writings, he did privateer for the British Crown, but he'd also fought for Protestant French armies. He had done a little bit of mercenary work. So the ending tries to say, he says something along the lines of, oh, I'm loyal only to God and Queen Bess. And it's like, oh no, in Robert E. Howard's stories, he's loyal to God, no one else. If you violate his convictions, or he finds you offensive to his religion, he's dropping you like a sack of potatoes. And it's even funny because a lot of Howard scholars have pointed this out, but Queen Elizabeth I was not very friendly towards Puritans. So the idea that he has this loyalty to her, it's like, no, I don't buy it. And I read something somewhere that apparently this confusion pops up because Queen Elizabeth I was often called Bess, but and Kane's love interest that Howard mentions in the story was named Bess also, but that Bess was from his hometown in Devonshire, England. Devonshire, just to clarify, Devonshire is the county, not the town. Devonshire was the county in England, not Kane's actual hometown. So it's kind of this thing where a lot of modern writers, I think, kind of conflate the two characters. And it's kind of like Kane does have feelings for Bess, but it's the best for his hometown in Devonshire County. It's not for Queen Elizabeth I. I think it's kind of just a thing of modern writers sort of going, oh, well, he's like old-fashioned and religious, so he has the devotion to his homelands, like all the traditional heroes do. And it's like, he normally does, but, you know, he has gone and worked for people outside of England, so it's not a... the whole thing about him was that he was devoted to God. He was not... If he had to go against something in his country, I have no doubt that Kane would, because that was kind of his main characterization. So, yeah, the ending kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I know a lot of this has been kind of nitpicking, but this is just one of those things where all these little things kind of add up and sort of just make this not as fun an experience as I was hoping it was going to be. So, I know this is a long video, but there were just a lot of things in this graphic novel that bugged me. So... So now we have to get to the final ranking. I rank on a 5-star system, 0 out of 5 being the worst, and 5 out of 5 being the best. As you can tell by the long time I spent criticizing this comic, I'm not going to give this a very high score. Now, originally, my gut instinct when I first finished reading this graphic novel was I was going to give it a 2 out of 5, which in my ranking system is mediocre. It's like, not the worst, but it's... there's a bare bones here that could work, but it's just not coming together. It's mediocre, which would be about 2 out of 5 stars. But this was one of those stories that the more I thought about it, the more problems I kept seeing, the more things started to bug me. And like I said earlier, I had just finished rereading all of the original Solomon Kane stories for an article I was writing. And that just made the things that didn't work for me really stand out, because I was always comparing it to Robert E. Howard's original work. And the problem is that when it's one thing for Robert E. Howard to write something better than you. Like that, he was a very good writer. It's a very good adventure and pulp writer. He's probably going to write something better than you. That's one thing. But when he writes something not just better than you, but very clearly has a stronger idea of the character than you do, and you're the one trying to adapt his character, that just makes the experience all the more intolerable to me. Because I just was kind of like, man, like I said earlier, every time I was reading this, I'm like, I could be reading The Moon of Skulls, and that's a better, not just a better Solomon Kane story, but a better written story in general. So this was one of those stories that the more I thought about, the more upset towards it I got. So I'm not giving this a 2 out of 5 stars. I'm giving it a 1 out of 5 stars, which in my ranking is a bad story. And I'm not the only one that had this reaction to it. There were others who have done bad reviews of it. I know Razorfist, he called it one of the worst Solomon Kane comics he's ever read. And I have to agree. Like, I like my gut instincts go, oh no, Razor, you're being too mean towards it. But again, as I kind of sat and looked at this and compared it to Howard's work, I went, no, it's pretty bad. And I guess the reason I'm giving it 1 out of 5 stars is the reason it's not a 0 for me, it's a 1, I think, is that Razorfist would disagree with me on this, but I think Patrick Zurcher does have a fondness for Kane. I think he does have a interest in him, and I think he is trying in certain elements in this story. Like, the art is very good. There are these sprinklings of cool character growth ideas with, like, Nico and Diamanta. So there is something there. So I can't, in my heart, give it a 0 out of 5. But the way he writes Solomon Kane is just really inconsistent with Robert E. Howard's version. And he doesn't focus as much on the historical elements as much as I would have liked. Because, again, Razorfist pointed this out in his Solomon Kane video years ago, that a lot of writers sort of overemphasize the fantastical elements of Solomon Kane's stories. And they don't fixate as much on the historical elements. And I think that's kind of what undercuts this story, because Zurcher almost sort of seems like he's going to focus more on the historical stuff initially. But then he falls into the trap all modern writers who write Howard characters fall into, which is he wants to emphasize the fantastical sword and sorcery stuff. He wants the snake men. He doesn't want just like a plain swashbuckler tale. He wants to have that fantastical element. And that really cuts this story off at the knees. It's just, yeah, the fantastical stuff is so overdone, and it's not done very memorably here. So, I would not recommend this story for any Kane fans. I wouldn't even recommend this to somebody as an introduction to Kane, because I don't think Zurcher does a very good job showing Solomon Kane as a character. I would just give him the Del Rey edition Solomon Kane. Actually, do I have it down here? I had the... oh, yeah, I have it right here. I would recommend if you're going to introduce anybody to anything, you get them The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane, which was put out by Del Rey, I believe. It has Ballantine on it, but I believe it's Del Rey. This has all the original Solomon Kane stories, along with some fragments that Howard hadn't quite completed, as well as some poems. So, and it's got great artwork by Gary Gianni, who does a lot of great black and white illustrations in this collection. So I would say if you want to introduce someone to this, get him the Savage Tales of Solomon Kane. I think it's a better, I was going to say product, but no, it's a better collection of stories than this Serpent Ring really is. And and one of the reasons, I said this kind of before, but the main reason I don't recommend this story as an introduction is that, like I said, my first major complaint with this story is that it's a Conan story masquerading as a Kane story, and that's not a good fit, because they had very different stories and story types. So going to this level, basically slapping Solomon Kane on a Conan story, that does not work as an introduction to the character. I think anybody who's introduced to him via this is going to get the wrong idea about what kind of character he is. So another major reason I wouldn't give this as an introduction to Kane. So don't do it if you're planning on it. Any inspiration? As for those that don't know, I'm a working writer, and I like going over at the end of my reviews about whether the thing I've just reviewed has inspired me in any way. And I will say, as much as I didn't like this story, there are some interesting ideas in isolation. None of the stuff relating to Solomon Kane, because I don't think that works very well. But some ideas here I kind of find interesting. Like Shah Kabat, I don't find her that interesting a character, but I kind of like the idea of like a reptilian priestess. That's kind of a cool idea of a priestess who like controls snakes and has like snake-like abilities. That's kind of a cool concept. I might take that idea for a story I write. I also think the idea of this story with Diamanta, the idea of like this woman who's half Christian, half Jew, trying to take control of her life by going on an adventure and sort of having this character journey of going from a scholar to an adventuress, that's a pretty neat idea in of itself. There's definitely something you could do there. So maybe that's something to do. Interestingly enough, earlier this year I finished reading Fair Margaret by H. Rider Haggard, and that actually had sort of an interesting conceit. It doesn't go as far with it as it does in this story, where there's a half Christian, half Jewish woman who has to figure out how to survive after she's taken out of her environment. I didn't care much for that story either, but that's kind of a similar concept to Diamanta here, and maybe expand a story with that idea. I might try and do something with that. So, but those are the things in isolation. In regards to Solomon Kane, I would not recommend this one. I would say if you're looking for good stuff, you get The Savage Tales of Solomon Kane. Contains all his original stories, and actually, I think us. Well, my books all fall down, but I pulled this out. You can also get, if you want a good Solomon Kane comic, there's a collection of them in Solomon Kane, the original Marvel years. This is an omnibus Marvel put out with all the stories they had from Kane. They came from like the backstories, the backup stories in The Sword of Conan and a bunch of other ones. I think Kane actually did have his own series at one point. Let's see. Oh yeah, he had the Solomon Kane 6-issue series that went from September 1985 to July 1986. So, yeah, this one has a lot of great Solomon Kane stories in it. So, if you want a Solomon Kane comic, I recommend you get this. This collection is a lot more satisfying. And that my irateness towards the Serpent Ring has inspired me. Sometime in the future, I'm going to do reviews of the original Solomon Kane stories, as well as a lot of the comics here in Solomon Kane, the original Marvel years. So I guess that's an inspiration. It's inspiring me to go back to these. So it is what it is. All right. So, any closing thoughts? I guess I would say, first of all, I do not know much about Patrick Zurcher. And as much as I've criticized his writing in this, this is not meant to be an indictment of the man himself. I want to clarify that I do not know anything about him. So this is not meant to be a condemnation of him as a person. And, you know, if he does do other Solomon Kane stories, I hope they are good. I do hope that he leans more into the historical elements than the fantastical, and that he gets a better grasp of Solomon Kane's character. I am not rooting for him to fail. I want him to make good Solomon Kane stories. So, if for some reason he finds this review, yeah, this is not a indictment of you, Mr. Zurcher. This is just how I feel about the comic. And the second thing being is that I'm not mad I read this, because I think this story really gave me an appreciation of how well Howard wrote Solomon Kane in his original stories. Like, there was something to Kane that Howard gave him that a lot of later writers struggle to grasp. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of showing how strong of a character Kane is and how good of a writer Robert E. Howard is. And I say is, not was, because writing is eternal. So, yeah. Sometimes you have to wade through the rain to get to the sunshine. So, again, I didn't like this story, but I'm not mad I read it. I almost said wrote it. It's like, no, I didn't write this. So, I hope that this review has taught you that sometimes you do need to read stuff you don't like, just so you can appreciate what you do like all the more. So, yeah, I hope this was a good learning experience for anyone watching. So, yeah, that's all I've got on this. I will be talking about Solomon Kane more in the future. Be sure to check out Razorfist and Michael K. Vaughn's videos that I leave in the description. And I will see you guys all in the near future. All right. Bye.